Yeah, all right. I always vibe to this music whenever it comes on, but that's how the way it goes. By the way, welcome to the RaceGuru Thunder Hour. I am your lead host, Sean Engel. You can find me on X or Twitter, the Xbox machine, however you want to say it, at SeanE247. And we got ourselves another NASCAR show. I know last week we were not able to get one episode of the podcast together, but here we are this week. We got ourselves another fun show lined up for today, covering Darlington. So before we get on into that and what's on docket for today, let me quickly tell you all about FantasyGuru.com. So over there at FantasyGuru.com, you can get the MVP all-in package for just $39.99. Gets you NBA plus NHL, NCAA, PGA, MMA, soccer, and racing, all for the really, really nice price of $40. So many sports, and you're covered for an entire year. So that is a really, really cool deal. But we're getting into the midst of football season. It's almost time for the football action to hit the internet, hit the viewership at the U.S. and all over the world. So we have other packages for that. You can get the Fantasy Guru NFL Draft Guide right now. And on top of that, you can also get the MVP Platinum Package, which contains all those sports I previously mentioned, including NFL and including baseball. You get that package over at FantasyGuru.com. You get yourself a great and fantastic deal. Gets you all the knowledge you need in order to win all that money back and then some. If you want to know where you can get the best deal for that in mind, you can go and email support at fantasyguru.com. That is support at fantasyguru.com, and they'll talk to you about the best possible deal you can get. So I know there's certain prices listed on the site, but going and emailing support is the best way for you to get the best possible deal. So you do not want to miss on that. Now, speaking of things you do not want to miss, well, this is a very interesting show, and I'm not actually alone this time. Rich is not here. He cannot make it this week, but instead, we got ourselves another member of the Fantasy Guru team back at it again with us, and he's now a part of the podcast here on a more regular basis. We got DFS Marlin, Mark Hogan, with us. Welcome back to the Thunder Hour. Good to see you join us for today. How are you doing?
Doing well, Sean. Thanks for having me back on. Good evening, and excited to talk some NASCAR, get after it here a little bit more consistently, and should be a fun weekend this weekend as well. So looking forward to making some money.
Yeah, it's always fun whenever we go out there and make some big cash, make some big money, make some fun calls, and just sit back and just enjoy ourselves while it all happens. Isn't that right, Mark?
Oh yeah, and this should be a fun race, especially after what happened earlier this year. So really looking forward to seeing what happens, and I think there's a lot of different directions that people are going to go. So we might see some a nice even spread on ownership as well.
That's a very nice way in order to preview and tease the weekend. But before we get to this weekend, we have to take a look back towards what happened in Daytona, because what happened in Daytona certainly sets the stage for what's going to happen this week. So let's get right on into it here. So we had ourselves a full slate of races. And, well, the Truck Series, they didn't actually race at Daytona. They raced at Milwaukee overall there, Mark. So were you able to catch this race, first of all?
Yeah, I did watch some of the trucks. Unfortunately, I just missed the green, but I did get on a few guys, including, I think the problem was for me, I went Lawless Allen off the top of my head, so he did not work out, and but Lane Riggs, I mean, hey, I had him on my lineup, so that's kind of what got a little bit of my money back. And ultimately, it was nice. I mean, the guy just looked fast. He started in the 16th position. He quickly moved up into the top 10 and just kind of inched his way closer and closer until he could take the top spot, and then just it was a competitive finish, obviously, but at the end of the day, he definitely his car stood out for sure.
Oh, that is for sure. We've talked about lane rigs all season at these shorter tracks. Rich Miletto's mentioned it in some of his articles in the past. You've mentioned it sometimes in the Discord chats. He finally pulls through for the victory overall. But the Truck Series is already in the middle of its playoff run. This was the first race of the Truck Series playoffs there, Mark. And what's interesting is that 8 of the top 10 Truck Series playoff drivers all finished in the top 10. Right behind Lane Riggs, we had Ty Majeski in second, Christian Eckes in third, Nick Sanchez in fourth, Taylor Gray in fifth, Tyler Ankrum in sixth, Corey Heim seventh, Daniel Dye eighth, and Ben Rhodes ninth. What do you think about this and how it says this about the strength of the playoff field this year there, Mark?
Well, I mean, to me, it feels like, this circuit is, these guys are starting to separate themselves and make, push for, maybe more opportunities higher up. So at the end of the day, we've got the same guys showing up in the top 10. I feel like this can definitely continue because these are a lot of the familiar faces, right? So, just going down the list, Majeski, Eckes, Sanchez, these are the guys that when you pull up the sports books, they're often the favorites to win these races on a week in and week out basis. So I'm not too surprised. I think we're gonna as we push further along, these guys are gonna get more aggressive, and we'll probably see a little bit more variance when it comes to where they finish in relation to where they stand amongst the field.
That is very true, and some good points raised up there overall. It is a pretty strong class of playoff competitors. Even the 2 drivers that didn't finish inside the top 10 that are in the playoffs, they certainly didn't even have the worst of days either. You had Grant Enfinger in the 13th position, and then Raja Caruth ended up finishing 18th, but he did have to start from the rear of the field in that race there, Mark.
Yeah. It's a tougher track, obviously, to get that track position back to. So, I'd expect Raja Karut that would actually be, the next trucks race. That would be a driver I would target because probably flying under the radar, likely not going to start at the back of the field the following. So, I think he could be kind of a sneaky play in the future here.
Yeah, that is definitely something we have to keep an eye on. The trucks, they're not going to return until midway into September when we hit Bristol, but that's another short track. So we
But
do
people
have,
are going to forget.
yeah,
That's the opportunity.
that is very true. Bristol is an opportunity because it is a very unique short track overall when we get towards that there, Mark. So, okay, let's get ourselves into the top place differential plays of the week for the Truck Series. These are the drivers that made fantasy players very happy overall if you use them in lineups. Now, the top driver, well, it was Lane Riggs who ended up getting 15 positions. He started 16th and finished first. Up 10 positions from their starting position was Jack Wood, a driver who we've been on and off about using this year. He started 25th, ended up finishing 15th. And then gaining 9 positions there was Ben Rhodes, who started 18th and ended up finishing 9th. So solid DFS days there for those 3 drivers, Mark.
Yeah, especially Wood. I mean, dirt cheap driver that, goes from 25th to 15th in a race that you don't see as much, place differential for. So 100%. But, and then Riggs, obviously, getting into that first position, getting laps led, going from, half the field up. I mean, that was the moneymaker right there.
Pretty much so. Now, on the opposite end of that, we have the worst place differential plays of the week for the trucks. 16 positions back was Bailey Curry. He started 13th, finishing 29th. Then 10 positions back was Raja Caruth, started 8th and finished 18th. And then Tanner Gray, who started 2nd, ended up finishing 11th. These 3 drivers, they were the ones that ended up contributing towards losing lineups this week overall, Mark.
Yeah, and we got to put the asterisk next to Caruth, right? So, I mean, again, an opportunity where a lot of people probably felt burned, but that came out before the race, right? I mean, we knew about that 20 minutes before.
Yeah, the news that he was going to be starting from the rear definitely came out before the race was able to start. So it just goes to show it's very important in order to pay attention to pre-race updates to know to change and adjust your lineups, especially in conditions such as like a short track, for example, where it's not going to be as easy to pass. You know that these drivers are going to have a much harder time in order to make that position back up and really be worth the salary there, Mark.
I mean, Sean, that's the value of the Discord too, right? I mean, wasn't rostering Caruth, but it's like, when I see a notification from someone posting in the Discord about Caruth, like that might be the first time I hear about it. So when you're not in there and you're not staying active and keeping up with it minutes leading up to the race, like you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage. And this goes for any sport. I mean, I've been doing coverage for NFL preseason the last couple of weeks. It's the same exact thing. You have to be looking at your lineup like a hawk, for a lot of these sports to make sure that you don't miss out on any late news and don't pigeonhole yourself before the slate even locks.
That is very true, and I couldn't have put it any better right there. And with the NFL connection, it all fits because we're getting into football season here before we know it too. So there you go. Now, getting into the stage winners, Ty Dillon ended up winning the first stage. Christian Eckes ended up winning the second. And lap leaders, Christian Eckes led the most laps at 71. Lane Riggs led 53 laps. Ty Majeski led 45 laps. And Ty Dillon only led 6 laps. So only 4 drivers ended up leading laps in the whole entire truck race there, Mark.
Sounds about right on this track, right? I mean, Eckes too. He's a driver that started at the front. What was he, the 2 or the 3 spot to start with? So, um, it makes sense. But I mean, Riggs again, just coming through in the clutch. If you rostered him, you were probably cashing.
So now, okay, now that we've covered all the background here, we have our list of finishers. Matt Crafton snuck into the top 10 there in the 10th position. Caden Honeycutt ended up finishing 12th. William Sawalich in the 14th position. Ty Dillon, despite winning that stage, he ended up finishing 16th. Expected more out of Sammy Smith in the 17th position. Dean Thompson, 19th. Stuart Friesen was 20th. And, well, that's pretty much what rounds out the top 20 there. Is there any other drivers on this list that you think we should spotlight here, Mark, before we move on?
Well, I mean, I was into Friesen and Purdy. I was a bit surprised they weren't able to gain a few spots in track position there, so that was quite a bummer. And then, I mean, Honeycutt just keeps quietly hanging around the top 10, so I think that's a guy to watch as we close out the year. So I think Honeycutt stands out to me, and then disappointment in Friesen and Purdy. I'm still trying to digest that part because I had those 2 guys in my lineup, and that definitely hurt a lot.
Yeah, sometimes these drivers just don't have the circumstances with the track come to them, or they just don't, the team does not tailor the truck in the correct way, and that could just kill their day right from there. Harsh, but true.
Yeah, it might be a lesson though for me in lineups as well as going after some of these guys that I think generally speaking, just throwing in maybe too many value plays in one lineup is there's a reason why they're value plays. And so there's more downside than you think when it comes to some of these mid-tier, low priced guys that when you look at the odds and you look at everything else, like some of the numbers line up, but you got to be careful not throwing too many of those guys in your lineup and making sure you get some safe options too.
It's true. You got to have a nice balance. Some of the most successful lineups out there have that sense of balance where you just got the value drivers, you got yourself your favorites, and even some mid-tier guys in between to really just make it all worth the while there. All right, so let's move on towards the Xfinity Series race and recap that. So with the Xfinity Series, they were at Daytona. Ryan Truex ended up nabbing his second win of the year. He's been on a part-time schedule, and he got it ahead of Chandler Smith and Parker Kligerman there, Mark. First reactions towards the Xfinity race.
I mean, it seems like that's a Truex type of race, so it's nice to see Truex up there. But I don't know. I Parker Kligerman stood out to me here, and Chandler Smith is a familiar face. So Couple of surprises, I would say.
Yeah, Daytona is usually known for their surprising finishers. Speaking of some surprising names, we had three of them inside the top 10 overall. Jordan Anderson in the sixth position, Leland Honeyman in ninth, and Kyle Weatherman ended up finishing in the 10th position there, Mark. But, it also was a pretty good day overall for Joe Gibbs Racing, considering that all four of their entries placed 12th or better. We had Ryan Truex winning, Chandler Smith second, Sheldon Creed ended up in the top 10 in the 8th position, and Joe Graff Jr. ended up coming with a decent finish in the 12th spot there, Mark.
Yeah, and even to round it out in the top 15, Blaine Perkins 14th, Kyle Sieg 15th. I think where did Perkins start in this race?
Perkins, he started quite back. He started in the mid to late 20s.
So that's some
And
pretty
that's
good
for
place
RSS
differential
Racing, by
itself.
the way.
Which
So,
they did pretty good in general, right? Ryan Sieg in fifth, and so Di Benedetto crashing out is probably the only downside there.
yeah, but otherwise for RSS Racing over there as well, they had a pretty solid day for their standards. They're a team that usually you expect just Ryan Sieg in order to be the most competitive and Kyle Sieg to be one of the more consistent value drivers. But Blaine Perkins in 14th was a little bit surprising to me overall, but he pulled on through.
Absolutely.
I
Which
think
he
what
doesn't always do that for us either. I've been burnt by Blaine Perkins too. So
That is very true. I I think what was overall kind of surprising to me was just the speed that the Toyotas have shown in this particular race. Daytona and the Xfinity Series in particular, that's a track where they just haven't shown as much muscle as, say, the Chevys or the Fords. And then Toyota, they ended up leading a lot of laps, and then they scored the 1-2 finish there with Truex and Smith. So
yeah.
pretty surprising to me with that.
Yeah, that seems like a big deal. I mean, like you said, Daytona though, I feel like anything can happen on any given race. So see if it continues.
True, true, true. All right, now let's get into the top place differential plays of the week for Xfinity now. Now, these are the drivers that made fantasy players very happy if you used them. So, the one driver that ended up earning the most positions was Sam Mayer. He started 38th, he finished 13th. Then plus 21 positions was Ryan Sieg, as mentioned. He started 26th and finished in the 5th position. And then we had two drivers each gaining 19 positions of place differential. Jordan Anderson, who started 25th and finished 6th, and then Kyle Sieg, who started 34th and finished in the 15th position there, Mark. Quite something.
Yeah, Sam Mayer is probably the least surprising, obviously, but some of these other guys, especially Jordan Anderson, I think that's the one that sticks out to me.
Yeah, for sure. And we know that Mayer was probably the chalk of the race, considering that it's a junior motorsports driver starting all the way in the back there. So there you
Yeah,
go.
kind of a layup there to a certain degree, but I don't know. We gotta look Jordan Anderson's way a little bit more. Like I gotta do some more digging on this guy here and see what's gonna happen with him moving forward.
Well, as he's actually the owner of Jordan Anderson Racing, which fields entries currently for Jeb Burton and Parker Retzlaff. And both of those drivers at certain points during this Daytona race showed a little bit of speed and muscle there too. So it just goes to show, even though the other two drivers didn't really finish up there as much per se, you got to watch for that team. And Jordan Anderson, especially because he's usually priced the lowest during these particular super speedway races, we have to always keep an eye on him as a value.
100%. This is the type of stuff though where you just have to take note because I really can't express how valuable it is to hear from you, hear from Rich, even some of the guys in the Discord, just the knowledge on some of these race teams and keeping an eye on how these race teams are doing. But I'm serious, like you got to take note, put it in like a Word document, put it in a note on your phone. I don't care where you put it, but label it, Daytona Raceway or Speedway, right? And then, the next race that comes up, you need to pull out your notes that you wrote down. And this is gold right here. Just remembering this type of stuff, which teams did well in most recent history, like that type of stuff. I cannot express enough how important it is to take notes and reflect back on those when we revisit racetracks.
This is why we always do a recap segment when we're doing the podcast, because from looking back towards past races, you can assess who the standout drivers are and which drivers you would have to watch for not just races when we go to this exact track, but similar types of tracks as well, because there's a lot of tracks on these NASCAR schedules that do share similarities with each other. All right, now let's get into the worst place differential plays of the week for the Xfinity Series. Austin Hill ended up just killing lineups, and this was a driver we expected a lot more out of. Just wasn't his day. He started in the second position, finished 31st. AJ Allmendinger, man, he was competitive up until the end when basically he got turned by Parker Kligerman. Started third, finished 24th. And then Parker Retzlaff, he did show some speed earlier on, but just did not have the finish to show for it. He started 15th, finished 34th there, Mark.
I forget how much Parker Retzlaff was for this race, but those, I will say this, it takes some guts to go after like a 6,700 guy, who's starting ninth, right? Because odds are they're probably going to move back, but like, at the same time, it's a huge opportunity because think about how many people get guys like Parker Retzlaff or maybe like a Josh Berry who, Josh Berry's another guy who can go either way in some of these races. And, a player like that goes from 15th to 34th, we're talking like negative 20 something points. And it's very hard to cash when you have negative 20 points in your lineup.
Yeah.
It's a different story when you get like a high price guy who gets like, records a bunch of laps led, but then maybe goes from first to like seventh because they make up for it in, getting all of those extra points or fastest laps. So I will say this again, it goes into the same concept we talked about earlier, where you don't want to overload too many of the same type of drivers in your lineup. Same goes with some of these value guys. Make sure you're not fluttering too much of your lineup and being too top heavy, and maybe chasing after one of these drivers who starts off high and can fall all the way to the very back because they just can't keep up with the group around them.
Yeah, that is very true. But at a track like Daytona, where that can go either way, it's a little bit trickier in order to play that sort of game. But usually I like playing the place differential game overall when it comes to these sorts of tracks. Not that that's going to apply as much for the coming week, but it is something that we do have to keep in mind overall. So there you go. Getting into the stage winners and the lap leaders, Justin Allgaier, he swept the first two stages by winning both of them. And as far as lap leaders are concerned, AJ Allmendinger led the most laps at 35. Ryan Truex led 28. Justin Allgaier led 16. Chandler Smith 15. Sam Mayer led 7. And Riley Herbst was able to score 1 lap led in this race there, Mark.
Yeah, Allgaier. I mean, rough. I guess you win both stages, so that's pretty unfortunate then to not take the race either. But it happens, especially at Daytona. So
yeah, it's very, very tricky to just sweep the stages and win Daytona. I'm trying to think back towards the last time that happened. I find a very, very, very difficult in order to think back towards the last time that happened off the top of my head.
Pole sitters don't do very well at Daytona, right? I mean,
more often than not, but there have been exceptions, especially I remember back in the day, like if you get yourself a top driver, like say Joey Logano used to be really especially good at these sorts of tracks. Sometimes when he started right from the front, you would not see him leave the front until like late into the third and final stage sometimes. So
it sounds like a familiar race.
It happens, but it's not something that we can comfortably rely on often. It depends on who exactly starts towards the front and who exactly starts towards the middle, you could say.
I'm curious what you think. So do you think some of these guys intentionally qualify towards, the middle or maybe not the back end of the pack, but maybe they don't want to, stay in the top 5 at the beginning of the race?
I would think more often than not, they usually try to go for it either way, just because even if you don't get the top position, you definitely want to be either towards the front of these sorts of packs of Daytona or towards the rear when you know you can avoid a lot of these accidents. But another thing that factors into qualifying a lot in particular is pit road selection, because where you start and which position you get as far as where you're starting also affects pit road selection. All the teams have to go forth and depending on, like, say, if you qualify in the first position, it means you also get your first pick of the stall on the pit road. And on some tracks, that could be very advantageous.
The only reason why I even was thinking about that is I was watching the race and they were talking about, finding the spot amongst the pack where you can save the most fuel. And it looked like in the cup race, at least, which I know I'm kind of jumping ahead, but it looked like it was around the 11th or 12th spot where it was like the optimal place to save fuel, save the most fuel. So I was like, oh, maybe some of these guys are targeting like that kind of middle of pack spot to start the race so that they can save fuel and be in a better spot towards the end of it. But I mean, it's one variable, like you said. I mean, you got pit stops and everything else. I mean, there's a lot of other factors that play into it. So I'm sure that's not the only thing they're thinking about.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of elements just that all just come into play overall. Now, getting towards some of the other finishers within the race here for Xfinity, Riley Herbst was fourth. Justin Allgaier was in the seventh position despite winning both stages. Josh Williams had a pretty decent day in the 11th spot. Brennan Poole finished 16th. Jeb Burton, who's part of Jordan Anderson Racing, as mentioned earlier, was 17th. Patrick Emmerling was a sneaky value play, ended up finishing in the 18th, scoring some nice place differential there, as well as CJ McLaughlin in the 19th spot and Joey Gase in the 20th position. But we also had some disappointing days from Jesse Love in the 21st spot, Brandon Jones in 22nd, Sammy Smith in 23rd, Shane Van Gisbergen finished 25th, Anthony Alfredo 26th, and Cole Custer, who ended up getting involved in an accident, ended up 32nd overall there, Mark.
Yeah, weird seeing the difference in SVG in this race versus the other one. Like you said, Emmerling is certainly the standout amongst this group. I feel like this is kind of like a outlier with Emmerling more than anything. I don't know how many times I'm going to be suggesting Patrick Emmerling here, but and then yeah, Jesse Love. I feel like it's been pretty down for Jesse Love recently.
As far as Jesse's results are concerned, he's been a little bit up and down overall this
Yeah,
season. He's had peaks and valleys, you could say.
yeah. So I don't know if I want to catch that falling knife here at any point. I guess moving forward, and then Brandon Jones too. That was kind of a weird one to see him down there.
Yeah, Brandon Jones overall, he's been very boomer bust this season, but to be fair, he's still on a long streak of not finishing in the top 10 ever since he finished as the runner-up in Charlotte all the way back at the end of May. So,
Man, it's been that long. That's crazy to think about. It's the the months are going by quick.
yeah, and even getting back to Jesse Love, he has failed to finish inside the top 10 since the Chicago street race at the beginning of July.
There you go. Yeah, what is going on with Jesse Love, man? I haven't been, obviously, with him on the decline here, I haven't been targeting him much, but now I'm curious just what the problem is.
I'm going to say that part of it is circumstantial when it comes to Jesse Love overall, because it's not like he hasn't been towards the front. He's actually led laps in 3 of the last 5 Xfinity events. So he's been trying. He's just been having issues either when it comes to his car, just been unfortunate on pit road, or he just lost positions, really. That's sometimes all it comes down to.
Maybe we got to keep an eye on Jesse Love here. See if he
Yeah.
starts further back, get some place differential out of him.
But those RCR cars usually qualify pretty darn well most weeks, so that's tough to calculate, but something to keep an eye on. Now, let's quickly recap the Cup race here. So, you could say this might be the shocking result of the year overall, because Harrison Burton ended up winning. He got his first ever Cup Series win, and he's going to join the playoffs. He vaulted past Kyle Busch and Christopher Bell after getting a push from Parker Retzlaff. So, how about that for a shocker, Mark?
Yeah, I wasn't expect. I don't think anyone was expecting Harrison Burton to win. I probably, even if they redid the race, I wouldn't be betting on Harrison Burton. But that was wild to see him come around the end like that. He just came out of nowhere and stole it from. I mean, that was a crazy push towards the end of that race. And look, I'm glad it kind of happened, because even though it's disappointing for Bush, I feel like Bush is being overlooked right now. And in my personal opinion, I was thinking this last week, and it seems like it. I think this past race now, um, supports my opinion. But I feel like Bush is starting to take a turn back towards the positive trend here, and he's finishing the season strong, and he's doing what he can to try and stay alive here. So things I feel like are working out recently for Bush. A lot of people, I think, still want to stay away from him just because of all the problems they had earlier this season. But I feel like he's still under the radar after losing a heartbreaker to Harrison Burton here.
Yeah, that race was just his to lose. And then that push from Retzlaff got Burton over the edge there, and Burton just never looked back. I mean, it's crazy to think, if you were on the betting boards probably earlier that week, Burton has been the worst performing driver all season. He's been the lowest driver in points out of all full-time drivers, 34th in points. That is really crazy and insane to think about. He probably, odds are, I'd say, if you ended up putting a outright winner bet on him earlier in the week, he probably would have been maybe even 500 to 1, maybe at some books.
Something insane like that for sure. And I mean, now he just stole a spot. He just made the he just made the final couple spots here of this playoff race. Just absolutely insane. So
Yeah, absolutely bonkers. Well, regarding the Cup race, both RFK racing cars ended up finishing inside the top 10. Brad Keselowski 8th and Chris Buescher 10th. So good day for RFK. There also were some surprising names in the top 10 of this one there, too. Now, we mentioned Parker Retzlaff, who made the final push. He ended up in the 7th position. Daniel Hemrick snuck into the 9th position for a top 10 there. And then Cody Ware in 4th? He got his first career top 5 finish ever in the Cup Series there.
this was a bizarre. You definitely can't. Anyone that has these optimizers or these simulators, I don't think this would have been an outcome in any single one of those optimizers. So, seeing some of these names that finished, and like there were some crazy things that happened too. I mean, Ross Chastain, his car was pretty much ruined. I mean, his car after that first, I think there was a wreck pretty early on in the race, and it just didn't seem like it was the same after that.
No.
Um, I mean, SVG was racing well. He was in the top 10 at some point. So I don't know. I think there was a lot of issues. Brad Kay getting a restart penalty.
That ultimately saved him from that next wreck that was going to happen a few laps after that happened.
Yeah, that was there were some massive wrecks here. I mean, I was upset. Okay, so here I think this is an opportunity. I know I'm jumping ahead here, but that wreck with Joey Logano, Justin Haley, and McDowell with like 10 to go or something like that. A lot of people on Logano, a lot of people were on Haley, especially Haley. He was a value driver that I think a lot of people in the industry were talking about. This might be a great bounce back opportunity where a lot of folks got burned on Haley and they're not going to go back to the well. I might be interested in going back to the well here.
True. That's a nice little tease for later there. Keep listening to the show when we cover our DFS picks. So there you go. So I just found it interesting about Cody Ware with his top 5 finish there too as well, Mark. He scored a top 5 finish before Kyle Larson has even scored a single top 5 at Daytona. Absolutely insane to think about.
Interesting. And another kind of nugget to just put in your back pocket and remember the next time Daytona comes around.
Truly. So let's quickly go over the rest of the notes here. Top place differential plays of the week for Cup. Cody Ware started 33rd, finished 4th. He gained 29 positions. Carson Hocevar gained 26 positions by starting 37th and finishing 11th. And then Christopher Bell gained 24 positions by starting 27th and finishing in the 3rd spot there, Mark.
Yeah, Christopher Bell, I think I gave out as a lock, and then it was him and I think it was him and Chastain, unfortunately. So, um, was it? Yes. And Chastain, I mean, even after that issue, he still finished 12th to finish the race. But Christopher Bell, I mean, 66 points. He was 45% owned, I think, in this high stakes contest that I played. But $8,400. It just seemed like, sometimes you see the pricing on these drivers, and that just the pricing on DraftKings seemed way off for a guy like C Bell. So
Yeah, because he's typically not a driver you associate with success at this style of racing, but he surprisingly had some pretty decent results before in the past too. So was overall a pretty solid fit for lineups this week.
that might be, what you just said too. It might indicate a turn for him. Like almost he's becoming a more well-rounded driver, and maybe it's something to take note of, like to just consider him across the board. He's getting more experience, and the more experience he has, the more weaknesses that he can work on and everything else. So I know sometimes these guys have these reputations. Hey, this guy's a draft the guy, or this guy's a short track driver. But as they get older, they change. They change as a driver, and their teams change and everything else. So
It's true. Worst place differential plays of the week. Ryan Preece bit lineups more than anybody there, starting in the 4th position, finishing 39th. Michael McDowell, he was the pole sitter, started first, ended up finishing 30th after getting involved in a wreck there, as mentioned. And Joey Logano lost 28 positions there, started 3rd, finished 31st, involved in the same wreck as Michael McDowell overall.
yeah, that was really unfortunate about Logano because I was pretty heavy on him. And I mean, wrecks happen, and there's not a whole lot you can do about them. You can try to predict who's going to get in a wreck and who's not, but at the end of the day, if you can correctly predict who is going to wreck on any given race, you're going to be probably winning more money than anyone else betting and playing DFS in NASCAR. So
It's true. It's true. So, stage winners, Josh Berry and Joey Logano, first stage and second stage, respectively. Lap leaders, there was a lot of drivers that led in this race. Logano led the most at 34, followed by Michael McDowell at 26. Justin Haley led 21. Bubba Wallace led 16. Austin Cindric with 15th. Chris Buescher with 10. Josh Berry with 9. Brad Keselowski with 8, as well as Kyle Busch. Todd Gilliland and Kyle Larson both led 5 laps. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Chase Briscoe all led 2. And then William Byron, Carson Hocevar, and Harrison Burton all led 1 lap. But in Burton's case, he led the most important one there.
100%. I mean, this is par for the course, though, for this track. I think historically speaking, we see 15 drivers or something like that on average, be lap leaders. So just goes to show, just again, that plays into the strategy and making sure you're not targeting people for laps led, because it's going to be pretty spread out in a track like this.
Yeah. Before we move on, any other finishers you want to spotlight in the field here?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest frustration is just all these big names towards the back because of the wrecks. I mean, you got Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, Chase Elliott, Tyler Reddick, Martin Truex, William Byron. I mean, I don't think did Truex wreck. I don't think he did, but
He was
um,
running at the end. He just did not have the position.
yeah, but I mean, you have a lot of these guys towards the back because of all these burnouts. So it's like we're saying it in the Discord all week. Like Daytona is a little bit of a lottery ticket here. Harrison Burton won the race, so Cody Ware. It's like it's just you never know what's going to happen at this type of track. So, um, my closing remarks here, I would just say, make sure you manage your bankroll accordingly whenever they go to Daytona, and just have fun with it. Don't go too heavy. Maybe focus on some of the other tracks if you want to play more when it comes to NASCAR, because this is always a crapshoot, I would say.
Yeah, usually is more often than not. Usually you get a mix between some favorites surviving until the end and competing for the win, some mid-tier drivers that end up just doing enough to be respectable plays, and then value drivers that nobody is on in order to finish well. So
Yeah,
that sums it up there in a nutshell right there.
for sure.
So, getting into the next section of our show, there is one big news story that came out this week that I felt was very important to cover overall, but that was NASCAR releasing the 2025 schedule for all three series. So, we've been waiting on this for months and months to know which venues are going to be receiving NASCAR action next year, and we finally got it. So, let's go through all the schedules here real quick, Mark. I actually have them right over here. Let's start with the Cup Series schedule for next year. So, right now, we have ourselves a lot of similar things towards last year, but here's a few notable notes. The Clash moves from the LA Coliseum to Bowman Gray. The Cup Series is off on Easter Sunday. Mexico City is going to be in and will replace the spring Richmond race. Brand new track for the Cup Series. Got ourselves a road course in for a short track there. Darlington, Gateway, and New Hampshire are going to be in the playoffs, while Atlanta, Homestead, and Watkins Glen are out of the playoffs. And then Talladega will move on to the round of 8 in the playoffs. It's from the round of 12 there, Mark. Pretty interesting stuff overall. Some interesting changes here.
Yeah, nice to see, with the Olympics out of the way, we're getting Darlington again. And then, so the difference, I'm curious to see what the difference is between, the clash at, going to the clash at Bowman Gray versus the Coliseum. So that race, I mean, that's like a Denny Hamlin type of race normally. I'm curious if that changes at all when it comes to our strategy. So we got to remember that. One other one that popped out, but I guess it's not that big of it. Oh, the Mexico City one. What is going to happen with that? Like, I mean, have we done this before? I haven't been looking at that too closely. And what's the track going to look like? I mean, I feel like to me, there seems like a lot of unknown on that front.
There is a lot of unknown because the Cup Series itself has never raced at Mexico City before. The Truck Series and Xfinity Series did actually head there, but not since the mid to late 2000s overall. So there are some drivers that do have a little bit of experience there in the Cup field now, like you could say Denny Hamlin and Brad Keselowski. Like some of the veterans of Cup now have raced at the track before, but that was in an entirely different car compared to what we're driving now, and the layout is going to be a little bit different. It is going to be a little bit similar to how F1 drives the track, but with some minor adjustments overall.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that'll be I would say that would be a light race for next year when it comes to bankroll. And then probably, I think any of the changes are going to be the ones that need to mark down to maybe go lighter on here. So as you can see, look, when it comes to DFS, it might be daily. We might only start talking about some of these races for a week, but the more we can take notes as we see it in the front end, the more that we can reflect back in the future and see everything that we've jotted down over the period of time, the better off we're going to be here.
Oh, for certain. And, even the teams themselves are going to be taking notes because, we see some changes in the playoffs in particular next year with some of those tracks. And we have Talladega moving to the round of 8. That right there is big just because the fact of the matter is that instead of it being midway through the playoffs, now it actually has big implications for who can make it into that championship round for Phoenix. And then we have some different tracks over here. Some of these teams are going to be looking back at their notes from the races ran at the tracks are going to be in the playoffs next year even more intently than before, and just really try to make sure that they're going to have their stuff ready for these races overall.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how they adapt, and we're going to see some new teams next year as well. So there's going to be a lot that changes even between now and then.
It's true. All right, so for the Xfinity Series schedule, it is a little bit shorter, of course, as per usual compared to Cup, but it also has some adjustments too. Rockingham, Mexico City, Gateway, and a second Bristol date are added for Xfinity next season, while Richmond, New Hampshire, and Michigan are taken off, while Darlington loses one of its 2 dates next year.
Interesting that we're seeing Darlington drop off there, and then we get Bristol in the playoffs here. The Mexico City one again. I mean, I'm just very curious how that goes. Homestead, Miami, that should be interesting, and Rockingham.
Yeah, Rockingham, I'm excited to see back on the schedule. That is a classic track right there that NASCAR has not visited since the 2000s. Good to see it back. Very interesting short track venue and very unique one, too, at that. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out next year, but a lot to really keep in mind over there, especially with Gateway also being the regular season finale for Xfinity.
How do you feel about the Chicago street races?
The Chicago street races, I think they're a very interesting experiment as it is overall. And we did see a good race over there in the Xfinity Series this year. It was some of the best racing of the year, as far as I'd argue, some of the road and street courses over there. And we had some of the best action with SVG and Larson battling it out over there in that particular race. So,
Yeah. And that was an exciting finish, even in the cup, at least at the end of it. The cup race, that was a mess for, a second year straight. But at the end, with Reddick kind of blowing that by hitting the wall, that I thought that was a fascinating finish. I think the concept is good. They just need a good quality, weekend to do it.
yeah, it's true, and not one where rain will affect it too badly.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
now the Truck Series schedule here it is. We have Rockingham, Lime Rock, Watkins Glen, New Hampshire, Michigan, and the Charlotte Roval all being added. So quite a few additions towards the truck schedule. But we have Gateway, Milwaukee, and Coda taken off, while Kansas will lose one of its 2 dates for the Truck Series next year, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect more changes. This seems like more changes than the other two, but I feel like in the truck series that you can get away with that. So I don't have a whole lot on this one here, but good to see some movement and a little bit of a different approach this year.
Yeah, very curious to see how the trucks are going to handle Rockingham and Lime Rock Park, because both of those tracks are completely new to the truck series. And Trucks hasn't mentioned it, Rockingham. None of the current drivers have seen that track there other than maybe iRacing so far. So very
Hmm.
interesting to see how it'll all shake out. But that is the 2025 schedules officially for next year. So that's all there is to it. A lot to look forward to. And from there, we'll see how it all happens. But let's keep the show running and going and flying here. So, how about we get towards previewing this week's race? Let's preview Darlington here, Mark. This is a track where, they nickname it the track too tough to tame, the Lady in Black. So many different nicknames for this track because it's one of the most famous tracks in all of NASCAR there. It's a unique oval there where each pair of corners has different degrees of banking and length. It is a total challenge for the drivers in order to nail this track, because typically we usually see a lot of teams nail the setup for one pair of corners, but maybe not so much in the second pair of corners there. We're using the intermediate speedway rules package overall there, Mark. So that's the package that's similar towards the 1.5 mile races. You could say like Texas, Kansas, Las Vegas, Charlotte. Those races we can definitely look back on as a point of reference for this week's race.
Yeah, I think The approach is definitely a balanced approach. You need some dominators. You definitely need some place differential as well. So that's what I was saying at the very beginning of our conversation. Is this definitely feels like a race where we're going to see ownership probably spread out relatively across the board. Um, but and there's a few different approaches that I think you can take with your lineups too, to get to that top spot. So you're going to be looking for laps led. You're going to be looking for place differential. Qualifying is going to be everything here.
Oh, definitely for sure. And practice is also going to be very big too, just in the fact of the matter is, even if, say, practice doesn't deliver the same exact conditions as race day, a lot of these drivers and teams, they are going to want track time just to get accustomed to the track. It's one of the toughest tracks on the NASCAR schedule. And a lot of these younger drivers that are in all the series, the Xfinity and Cup series, this is typically a track where if you don't have as much experience and don't take it to it right away, you're not really going to be that good here. And this track favors veterans that have experience. So overall, that's something to keep in mind.
But then it's like, what do you do? Because you want to go after the experienced guys. The experienced guys, a lot of them are towards the top. The guys that have the best history here are the highest priced, of course, and that means you're going to have to punt somewhere. So um, it's the punt options. That's why I just think we're going to be all over the place. We're going to have some people who throw in two dominators, some people who throw in one, some people who try to just thin it out and go mid pricing across the board. You can fall flat on your face doing that too. So I think it's going to be a very interesting approach here.
Oh, definitely for sure. And another thing that we have to really keep in mind for the Cup Series this week, this is the cutoff race pretty much. I'm going to go forth and share my screen real quick just so we can get a sense of the playoff picture. There we go. So you see over here, this is how the playoff picture currently shakes out overall. And with that in mind, we have to know that this is the very, very last chance that drivers have in order to make the postseason for the Cup Series. Martin Truex Jr., Ty Gibbs, and Chris Buescher are ahead of the playoff cutoff line there. Truex is pretty much all but just about locked in, as long as he doesn't have a terrible day. Gibbs just needs like a little top 10, top 15 run, and he's basically good. Now, Chris Buescher, he's in a position where he can't afford to have a bad day. And then you have Bubba Wallace and Ross Chastain within striking distance that they could still potentially point their way in. But anybody from below Ross Chastain down, you can see Kyle Busch, Briscoe, Gilliland, Hocevar, McDowell, and so on. They have to win in order to get in. So that's going to really affect a lot of the strategy this week as well there, Mark.
And so I think if you compare this, so this is why looking at the playoff picture is very important going into a race like this, because Ty Gibbs, Chris Buescher, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Kyle Busch, they're all fighting for these spots, but they're all priced around the same range here. So there's going to be a lot of people. I was just talking about before where we have someone just attacking a bunch of mid-tier drivers, not looking at the playoff picture and realizing like you have to take some stands right here. You can't just play all of these guys and expect that lineup to go off, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, someone's going to get probably taken out of this group here. And I don't know who it's going to be, but that is where you might want to spend more time researching as we get closer to the start of the race, because, you know, at the end of the day, when you're playing DFS, you have to take a shot. If you play too safe, you're never going to cash high. You're never going to get that top prize. So I just think this is important to understand why we're looking at this, because there's going to be a lot of people out here that just hammer that 8K price range.
Oh, for sure. And the thing is, too, is that for a lot of these drivers, their season is on the line with this exact race. It's go big or go home. Some drive pretty much, like I said there, Bubba Wallace and Ross Chastain, they can still point their way in, but everybody else below them, they have to win in order to get them in. There's no possible way for them to point their way in. And with those drivers in mind, they're going to try to bring their best stuff, their best equipment, their best setups just for this week. And that's going to be a very important thing to note. Even though some of these drivers at the top there too, that's another thing we have to keep in mind. There's another battle that people aren't talking about as much here as well, Mark, that's also important is the battle for the regular season championship as well, because that contains a lot of bonus playoff points for the whoever ends up as the regular season champion. And Tyler Reddick is currently on top of that over Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott by 17 and 18 points. So, and that's going to get settled within this race too. And so for some of those favorites right there, they have incentive in order to race well.
Hey, Tyler Reddick and Chris Buescher. What happens between those two, though?
Yeah, that's true. Now that Buescher basically he's in the hot seat right there while Reddick is fighting for the regular season title. So
Reddick owned up to it, and going back to the race back in May, right? I mean, he owned up to what happened, but I don't know. Buescher's coming for it, and we could see something between those two in this race.
if they both get to the front, that is.
That's true. That's true.
Because never know. A team could go forth and bring their best stuff, but if they get the car set up wrong, that's going to kill their entire weekend right there too.
So, like, just looking at the odds, though, I mean, Reddick is minus 110 to finish in the top 5, where, we compare that to Chris Buescher, and he's plus 180.
Yeah, just goes to show. Pretty interesting overall. So before we get on into the, let me rattle up off the notable and part-time starts for the series this week here. In Xfinity, we had Greg Van Alst in the SS Greenlight number 07, Chad Fincham in the SS Greenlight number 14. Joey Logano is in for AM Racing in the number 15 Ford. Chase Elliott, this is one we have to watch for Xfinity in particular, too. He's in that number 17 for Hendrick Motorsports. That right there is going to be big to keep in mind. Joe Graff Jr. is back in the number 19 for Joe Gibbs Racing this week. Christopher Bell is in the 20. That's another big name that we have to keep in mind because those Gibbs cars are always very good in Xfinity. Corey Heim is in the 26 for Sam Hunt Racing this week. Noah Gregson is in the number 30 for Rhett Jones Racing, another name that we have to watch right there. David Starr is expected to be in the number 35 for Joey Gase Motorsports. Garrett Smithley in the number 45 for Alpha Prime Racing. Dawson Cram in the number 74. Carson Kvapil, always a name to watch, in the number 88 for Junior Motorsports. And then Ross Chastain is in the number 92 for DGM Racing. So that could be an interesting play right there, too. Now, in the Cup Series, we have Kaz Grala in the 15 for Rick Ware Racing. Good to see him back in there. Shane Van Gisbergen is doing double duty and is in the Cup field this week as well, driving for the 16 for Kaulig Racing. And then there's Timmy Hill in the number 66 for Power Source, which I am not expecting to be a factor at all this week.
I think SVG could be sneaky. Like he looked good. He looked good last week. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Positive news, like good vibes coming out, here for him going into 2025. I mean, he's probably going to drive, race loose. So, I mean, obviously qualifying is going to be a huge impact on whether or not we target him. But at $6,400 on DraftKings, if we can see him pretty far back, I mean, he might be a very low owned value play.
It's true. Especially because SVG, he's mainly doing this just for Cup experience. He's not looking or expecting to win unless he's in a position to do so through pit strategy. And Kaulig Racing is not one of the top teams that they're not really going to be going for a really high-end finish unless they play on that strategy game if the opportunity arises. But
like one of those things though, like $6,400 if he starts 29th and finishes 14th, like that would more than pay off. And he's not, like you said, he's not going to be maybe as aggressive as some of these other drivers who can get in some wrecks here. So it might be a safer value play.
It's possible, certainly possible right there. Now, before we get into our driver picks and go through our core fours and bets, be sure to, if you're listening to this podcast, go over to fantasyguru.com, get the MVP Platinum package, which has everything and anything you need in order to win big in DFS and betting and just plain old enjoying sports the best way possible. So go over there. Get any of the NFL packages. You can always go forth and get the MVP all-in premium package there for NBA, NHL, NCAA, PGA, MMA, soccer, and racing for a low price there to get covered for a year as it stands. Go over here and email support@fantasyguru.com. They'll be sure to get you the best possible deal. And, well, it just goes forth into we speak upon our product here. It's a very darn good product, if I do say so myself. And we help people even win their money back, just even paying the $40 for the MVP package. So, go forth, get the MVP package, get the platinum package, get ready for NFL season because it's right here, and you're going to be contributing more to the NFL content this year. Is that correct there, Mark?
Yeah, I just did some NFL preseason. I gotta say, I mean, I joke around about it with my family at this point, but it's like Q4 of the year when football season starts. This is financially my favorite time of year because of what we do in the Discord, what we do with the amount of content that's coming out, especially on the football landscape. Football is by far my most profitable sport, and that's mainly because I have all of the content that I can utilize from everyone else here at Fantasy Guru, apply my own process, and it's the most opportunity. There's so many more contests in the NFL. There's so many more contests when it comes to college football for so much bigger amounts of money and prizes. So if there's any time of year where you're going to be, going in on one of these packages, this is the time to do it.
Couldn't have said it better myself right there, Mark. You sold the product very well, so there you go. All right, let's get into our picks here. Let's start with our top price picks to watch there. Now, as far as the three drivers we each chose for this category, we actually overlap on 2 out of the 3 each. We're both on Denny Hamlin and Tyler Reddick overall. I love these 2 drivers there. This place pretty much used to be been known as Denny's house because he really knows how to get it done here. He has so many great finishes. This is one of his very best tracks, even since early on in his career. And he's been very consistent when it comes to leading laps in a lot of the recent races at this track. And then Tyler Reddick, well, I mean, Denny Hamlin owns his car. He's a co-owner. So, of course, Reddick probably also gets tips from Denny Hamlin in order to really drive well. And Reddick's been really good at this track in recent races. He almost won this race earlier in the year. So definitely cannot ignore that. Now, where we differ is that you have Kyle Larson as your third driver there, Mark. Explain to the audience here what makes you on Kyle Larson this week.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Larson, going back to last year, he actually led 55 laps and won the race. So, and he started in the 18th position. So, obviously going to be interesting to see where he qualifies again. But he's the type of driver that can move up in the field so quickly that I'm always targeting him, quite frankly. And I also like Kyle Larson because I think between him and Denny Hamlin, he's going to be the lower owned driver for some of the points that you just made. And I think all those points are fairly accurate too, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Denny Hamlin has a ton of laps led on this track historically. But I think what I like about Larson is the fact that he will be lower owned because the most recent race we saw him wreck. So I think he finished 34th and he led 15 laps. So, people might look at some of the historical data and that skews the numbers a little bit, but I think that's where the opportunity is in NASCAR is you get all these people applying analytics and crunching the numbers from previous races, and accidents are just so it just skews data in my opinion. And so that's why in my opinion, I gotta look after Kyle Larson. And then like you said, same reasons for Denny Hamlin and Tyler Reddick. So
I agree with the call for Larson. I think he should really be up there as well. I think had there been 4 drivers, he probably would have been the 4th on my list that I would have put down really there too. This is one of Larson's better tracks overall too. And for a while there, before he ended up winning, a little while ago, he did have a streak of about 4 top 3 finishes, podium finishes right there. So he's really, really good at this track, and he has extra motivation because he's one of those 3 drivers that are still eligible to compete for the regular season championship overall there too. So that's another point to keep in mind for why Larson could be one to watch.
I
But
didn't even think of that.
yeah, but as far as my last driver on the top price list, it actually is Brad Keselowski, the winner from earlier this year that I have. This has been a good track for Brad. He's finished in the top 10 in the last 4 Darlington races overall. And for the price point, as far as that is concerned, I really like it a lot because he's under that 10K range of DraftKings. He's 9,800. And then when you even get towards FanDuel, he's a flat 11K. For a driver that ends up really being consistent at this track in recent years with Brad Keselowski, I think you've really got to like the price. And RFK, they've been really good at this track in recent years. A lot to like there.
I think you hit a really good point with FanDuel too. Like Brad Keselowski presents an extra bonus over on FanDuel. I wouldn't be surprised if he'll be chalky over there, but quite frankly, I'm willing to eat that type of chalk. The other thing about Brad K is like I just feel like if he's going to qualify top 5 or somewhere around there, like that's even more of a confirmation that he's going to have a good race. Like if you look at the last 2 races, for example, he started in 5th and he finished in 6th, and then he started in 2nd and he finished in 1st. So it seems like on this type of track, he holds his position and typically is going to be towards the front when qualifying.
And it's crazy to think about how many times this season that Brad Keselowski has scored positive place differential overall. It is actually, he's been one of the best of the year in that particular stat. And you even look back towards the last couple of races, each of the last 5 races, Brad K has scored positive place differential every single time. So he knows how to be consistent. And the thing is, he's not always going to get the best qualifying effort. But like you mentioned, if he does get a really good qualifying effort, that only just makes it even more scary for the fact of the competition that he's going to be really good.
100%. I think it's a very strong play.
And just for the price point, I think it's just perfect in order to slot him in easily.
Absolutely.
So now getting into our mid-tier drivers to watch. This is going to be interesting as it is. I ended up picking 4 drivers, and as for Mark, well, he took a whole group of 5 here, but we pretty much are paying attention towards all the same drivers here too. So let's just discuss it here. Chris Buescher, Ty Gibbs, Ross Chastain, Bubba Wallace, Kyle Busch. These 5 drivers, I think it's very safe to say, because they're all fighting for the playoff spot, that these are the drivers that we really have to keep our eye on for sure.
I think this mid tier, this is make or break. Like what you decide here is going to determine how well you do this weekend. Um, I threw in Kyle Busch because I just feel like if you look at this whole group here, he's the one driver that most people are going to gravitate away from and maybe go after like the other 4 and Gibbs, Busch, or Chastain and Wallace. So for me, I like Busch the most because I just don't. I'm going to try and zig when everyone else is zagging, or vice versa. So I like Busch. I think people are going to get scared off of him. I think he's trending upwards. It's my favorite of the group, but every single one of these guys, I mean, are certainly in play. I'm also really into Ross Chastain for a bounce back. So again, I think my approach when I'm looking at this is just which of these guys are going to be the lowest owned. That's where I'm going to take my shots on, and I feel like Chastain and Busch are probably going to be those 2 guys.
I definitely agree about the Busch point that he's probably going to be the top contrarian play of the group, but without question. Just because RCR, they've been very mixed at this track. Sometimes they've had good runs at this track with Austin Dillon and Kyle before, or even Tyler Reddick when he used to drive this car. He had some runs where he's been up and down too. So Depends on how they nail the setup. Definitely good for GPP, I'd say, overall there. And the thing is that Busch, he's had some bad luck in recent Darlington races too. I still remember his last race at Darlington in 2022 when he was driving for Joe Gibbs Racing, his last start at the track for that team. He was leading over 100 plus laps, and then he ended up blowing his engine. Bad luck right there. So that's
Yeah.
the case for Kyle Busch. I think especially when you notice that RCR, they've been putting out some more speed than normal the last couple of weeks. I mean, Austin Dillon won at Richmond. Kyle Busch nearly won at Daytona this past week. Something we just have to keep in mind overall. Ty Gibbs, he's a driver I like particularly for DraftKings because the price over there is friendly enough, whereas at FanDuel, he has a very big difference in price compared to the rest of the group pretty much because he's a flat 10,500 over there, while the other four drivers are around like that 8,500 range or less. So something to keep in mind there. Even though Ty Gibbs finished as the runner-up earlier in the year at Darlington. Now, as for Chastain, he's a driver that's had some good runs. He's led a lot of laps before. I think he's definitely in play. I like Chris Buescher a lot because he nearly won this race earlier in the year. He's had some strong runs at the track recently. And then Bubba Wallace, he's on a streak of top 10 finishes ever since the next gen car debuted. He's not finished outside of the top 10 at Darlington, and he needs to have a really good run in order to make the playoffs. So right there, any of these drivers are in play.
If there was a driver that I feel like is going to take a shot in this race, it's going to be Bubba Wallace. And if there's a driver that I feel like is not going to finish this race of this group, it might be Bubba Wallace as well. And I just think that I feel like this is the race where he gets super, super aggressive and he takes his shot here, especially with Reddick's out there, and obviously there's Hamlin with an investment. I mean, there's a lot of elements that go into play, and him probably thinking that this is the track to make a move here. So, I mean, Bubba Wallace would be like one of those. I don't know if I'd play him in a DFS lineup, but that might be a good. I don't think I'd put it down, but I think that might be a good bet to make for a winner as well.
It's especially interesting because DFS wise, Bubba is actually the cheapest of all these drivers in order to put into
Yeah.
a lineup too.
But I think he's going to be the highest owned because of all this. Like from a DFS perspective, I feel like I'm going the route of betting him versus playing him in DFS.
That's fair and valid. If anything, I definitely would place a top 10 bet considering he has 4 consecutive top 10s at this track going into this race. So
I like that.
Yeah.
Lock it in. Lock it in. Cha-ching.
Boom. Let's get into our potential sleepers and values. So for this list over here, there is one driver that we can both safely agree on, and that's Justin Haley. I mean, we nickname him the free square on this podcast just because he's consistently delivering results without spending too much money. This is actually a really, really solid track for Haley as well. He has 3 top 10s in the Cup Series at this track overall. Now, interestingly enough, none of them have come within the August or September races at Darlington. They were all in the spring. But that being said, though, he did put himself in a pretty good position earlier in the year and ended up scoring a top 10 finish out of it. And just for the price point alone, and here's the other thing, too. Rick Ware Racing, they are aligned with RFK Racing with a tech alliance. So although Rick Ware is not going to be as good as RFK, we can trust them in order to actually be a decent ride overall there. So wouldn't you agree that that makes Haley a really appealing play?
Yeah, I mean, all of those reasons that you just mentioned from a NASCAR perspective. I mean, the other race back in September, he started 29th and finished 24th. And even if that happens, that doesn't kill you, at his price point, and it allows you to pay up for, some of these higher owned guys. So, and then I think I mentioned it earlier briefly, but it's just like with Haley, we get the recency bias to play into this as well, where there's a lot of DFS players last week that got burnt by him from going multiple laps down early on in the race and never being able to recover. So, I myself got burned by him, but it happens sometimes. They're not going to pay off every single race, especially a guy like this. And I love the concept of getting him on the bounce back and watching all of those other DFS players in their misery, being like, why this week when I decided to not play him? And it's like, well, because you are only looking at the recent results from last week and trying to compare it to this, this other track here. So I love Haley for all the reasons that you said, and I also love Haley for all the DFS strategic reasons. That is why it's going to be very hard for me to come off of him at the $5,700 price point on DK and $3,500 on FanDuel.
Yeah, very, very cheap and very effective. Now, the other three drivers you mentioned on your list are Eric Jones, Josh Berry, and Shane Van Gisbergen. So I can definitely understand the Jones call considering his history overall. And then Josh Berry, he ended up scoring a top 5 finish earlier in the year, too. And then Shane Van Gisbergen, you kind of teased it earlier. What are your further thoughts on why you like these three as well this week?
Well, I think Eric Jones, SVG, both of them, I like that the fact that they've been racing well as of recent. Josh Berry is up and down. Josh Berry is quite the roller coaster, but like you said, I mean, going back to May of this year, he was 33rd and finished third in this race. So can he do that again? I don't know if he's going to do anything like that again by any means. But if he starts 33rd and finishes 20th, he's going to, that's going to work out here for us as well. So he's probably my least favorite of the four that I mentioned. I think SVG is really, really interesting, especially if we get him in like the 28, 29, 30 range at $6,400. And I just think there's a lot of positives coming out of that camp here. So I would also say, in my opinion of this group, SVG, Haley's still probably going to garner some ownership. SVG will probably be the lowest owned.
That makes sense, especially considering that SVG he's just a part-timer in Cup this year too.
Part-timer, so he's not going to take maybe as many risks. And I just I look at him and say, like, this is another one of those drivers. We were talking about it with Christopher Bell before, where maybe they're taking a turn and maybe they're in some of these other tracks that they're not necessarily known for having a whole lot of success with, improving on and becoming just a better driver overall. Like they're just hitting that point of their career where they're taking another step forward. And I just feel like SVG is that guy, given the news, given how he's been racing recently. And last week was just, he got wrecked and it was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was racing very well last week. So I've got a lot of points as to why maybe SVG could be a difference maker in your lineup this weekend.
Very interesting overall to say. Now, within my list here, I have the Todd father, Todd Gilliland, anchoring that. He's 6,800 on DraftKings, and in FanDuel he's only 5,500. He's a driver that, regardless of track, he's usually been a lock for a top 20 finish within that front row motorsports equipment. And if he qualifies, say, around like the mid to late 20s, definitely one driver that I have my eye on, especially because he typically finishes close to the top 20 or gains place differential every time he comes to Darlington. Now, we talked about Haley, but for my last drivers, well, really, it's kind of a split depending on which site you play on. If you're going on DraftKings, I say Ryan Preece is a total bargain in order to consider, just for the place differential aspect alone. In fact, actually, Ryan Preece, he has 9 starts at this track. Only twice has he failed to score positive place differential. So that's 7 out of 9 times he has scored positive place differential, regardless of where he started at Darlington. And for the price point on DraftKings in particular for him, he is $5,600. That is really, really cheap.
Yeah.
especially for production like that. Whereas FanDuel, he's a flat 5K. He's not as usable there. But another driver that you can find to be pretty usable in FanDuel in particular, I think, is Carson Hocevar. 3,800. He's another driver that's been consistent with finishing in the top 20, regardless of track type. And now he has some experience because he finished in the top 20 earlier in the year at Darlington. He's only 3,800 on FanDuel. Whereas DraftKings, he's still fairly usable too there. He is a flat 6K overall on DK. So Priest and Hosafar, I think, are two other drivers to watch. And I know I didn't list this other driver here, but I feel like this is another one that I think people are not going to talk about and not mention. But Harrison Burton, the driver that just won. We know Harrison has a reputation of not being exactly the best driver for most of the year. But when you look at the numbers and you look at his past Darlington finishes, you'll see that other than maybe one or two results, he's actually scored positive place differential more often than negative at this track. And for the price point overall, he's 5,900 on DraftKings and 3,200 on FanDuel. He's not my top choice, but I do feel like just based on the numbers alone and the fact that I think nobody is going to be playing him this week, and I mean absolutely nobody is going to,
Yeah.
I think you kind of have. I'm just going to have to throw the name out there, just period.
I mean, the interesting thing about Harrison Burton on FanDuel is he really allows you to get different. Um, because you get to go all the way down to 3,200 versus Haley. Like, okay, so the one thing about Haley is even though he'll probably be less ownership than last week, I still think he's going to garner some ownership. So the three guys that you just mentioned, you have Priest, Hocevar, and Harrison Burton. All of those guys are in similar price ranges and are probably going to be lower owned than Haley. But the thing about Harrison Burton is on FanDuel, because of how cheap he is over there, you can build a very, very different lineup. And so I like what you're saying with Harrison Burton specifically on FanDuel because of how contrarian I can look at my lineup and how top heavy I can then go over there, which I just don't think many people are going to do.
Oh, yeah. And even under that same sort of logic, another driver that I think we can also keep in mind, too, that I think nobody's going to be playing, but could be worth a look just based on his recent finishes. And this, despite the inexperience at this track, Zane Smith, 5,400 on DraftKings, and he's just a flat 3K on FanDuel.
Wow. There's a lot of different directions you can go with this here. I mean, that's what we've been saying. I think this is just going to be very spread out. There's a lot of different approaches that you can take, and it really just depends on the format you're playing, the type of contest that you're playing in, and even the site.
It's true. Very, very true. All right, so let's get into our core fours here real quick. Let's start with the betting core four. I have for my betting core four for outright winning, Kyle Larson at plus 550, Denny Hamlin at plus 600, Tyler Reddick at plus 650, and Chris Buescher at plus 1400. My two long shot calls, I have two this week. That's right. Bubba Wallace and Ross Chastain. They're both at plus 2,000. So overall, I think these drivers have a chance over here. Mark, give us your betting core for.
Yeah, I agree with the strategy of getting two mid-tier guys, some of those playoff guys that are going to be looking for a win. So Buescher at plus 1,400, I think is a great play. And then I'm also in the same camp of getting one of these plus 2,000 guys in Ross Chastain. Tyler Reddick, I mean, he's looked really good in this track. I'm probably not targeting him in DFS, so that's why I like him. I like getting him a little bit of exposure here in my betting core four at plus 650. And then, Kyle Larson, I just think at plus 550. Again, I think he's going to be a little bit different. I think as we get closer to the race after qualifying happens, we're probably going to see even, it might go up to maybe plus 500 or plus 450 or something like that. So I like this one early for Kyle Larson as well.
Not a bad call. All right, so for our DFS core fours, I'm going to get into mine here. This could apply to either site. I like these drivers. I have Tyler Reddick. He is 10,500 on DraftKings, 13,500 on FanDuel. Like the price on both sites since he's not the most expensive driver on either site. Chris Buescher, he's 8,500 on both DraftKings and FanDuel. I especially like him for FanDuel this week. Bubba Wallace, he's 7,700 on DraftKings, 7,800 on FanDuel. And then rounding it out is Justin Haley at 5,700 on DraftKings and 3,500 on FanDuel. That is my favorite DFS core four right there. Mark, let's hear yours.
I've got Denny Hamlin on DK at 11K and FanDuel 13K, and Kyle Larson at 10,700, FanDuel 14,000. So as you can see, the reason why I'm setting this up with these two dominators is I really think you need two dominators in this race, and we can find place differential in other spots. I think we can certainly get a lot of place differential out of Ross Chastain over on DK at $8,000 and FanDuel 8,200. And so there's your mid-tier option, and then your value play. I'm in agreement with Justin Haley as my core at DK $5,700, $3,500 on FanDuel. And when you do that on both of those sites, it allows you to get different. It allows you to still have some flexibility to do what you want in your lineup. And then I would say on FanDuel, there's a little bit more restriction because there's one less spot, but there's still some creativity that you can throw in there with these guys.
I like it. I like it a lot. That's a strategy that I think I'm going to be using in some of my lineups when I'm setting that up this weekend there. Well, anyway, Mark, it's been great having you on the Thunder Hour. How do you feel after all this?
Love it, man. I'm excited to continue to get more integrated with the NASCAR team. Really excited for this weekend's races. Got some, be contributing on that front here as well. So I would say the biggest thing is that there's a lot can change, from now into the races, as we all know. So we'll keep up with y'all in the Discord. I would say as we get closer and active, closer to these races, we'll be more and more active on that front as well. I really can't stress enough how important I think the Discord itself is as a tool. I think you get your money's worth just directly through that. And I try to stay very active on that front. So looking forward to keeping up with y'all behind the scenes and making us all some money this weekend.
Love it. Love to hear it, man. That's the way to do it. And that's the way we roll here at the RaceGuru Thunder Hour. Everyone, thank you for watching or listening. Be sure to like, subscribe to the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to check it out, the post on fantasyguru.com, all of our latest content over there. Mark over here, he's handling the article for the Xfinity Series race this weekend. I'm handling Cup Series duties, so be sure to look forward to that. Interact with us on Discord, and we'll get you all revved up and ready to roll so we can see you all in victory lane with some big fat cash. All right, that'll do it for this week's RaceGuru Thunder Hour. That's Mark Hogan, DFS Marlin. I'm Sean Engel. Thank you very much for watching or listening.
Deuces.